Welcome to SQE 1 Preparation, Criminal Practice, Newton Hearings by Nasir Fizi, Solicitor. SBAQ specification refers to this, which you should be familiar with now if you've been watching all the sentencing classes. The role of sentencing guidelines, determining seriousness, including aggravating and mitigating facts, concurrent and consecutive sentences, mitigation, types of sentences, and this one is about Newton hearings. As always, there are some test your knowledge questions. So the first one is on a true and false quiz questions. Question 1 is true or false: a Newton hearing is only necessary if the defendant pleads not guilty. Question 2, true or false: a judge must always hold a Newton hearing if the defence and prosecution disagree on the facts. Question 3, true or false: a basis of plea is a document prepared by the defence setting out the defence version of events. Question 4, true or false: if the prosecution accepts the basis of plea, the judge must also accept it. Question 5 is true or false: the judge can proceed to sentence based on the prosecution version of facts if the defence's basis of plea is considered absurd. Question 6, true or false: a Newton hearing is held before the guilt or innocence of defendant is determined. Question 7, true or false: a Newton hearing allows both prosecution and defence to call evidence and witnesses. Question 8, true or false: the outcome of a Newton hearing determines whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty. Question 9, true or false: a Newton hearing can be avoided if both parties agree on the factual basis for sentencing. And question 10, true or false: the disputed facts must be significant enough to affect sentencing for a Newton hearing to be held. And then we have an example of a test your knowledge. Tony pleads guilty for burglary in the Crown Court. The prosecution asserts that he broke into a house by smashing a window, ransacked multiple rooms, soiled carpets, and stole several high-value items, including jewellery and electronics. Tony's defence, however, submits a basis of plea stating that he entered through an open window, did not damage the property, and only took a small transistor radio. The prosecution rejects this version, arguing that the disputed facts would significantly affect the sentencing outcome. The judge reviews the basis of plea and finds Tony's version of events implausible and unsupported by any evidence. The judge must now decide how to proceed. So the question is, which of the following is the single best course of action the judge should take in this scenario? Is it 1, proceed to sentence Tony based on his version of events in the basis of plea as he has pleaded guilty? Is it option 2, schedule a Newton hearing so that both parties can present evidence and the judge can decide the facts? Question 3, reject the basis of plea as absurd and proceed to sentence on the prosecution version of events without a Newton hearing? Question 4 is, option 4 is, refer the case back to the magistrate's court for sentencing? Or is it option 5, discard the basis of plea and impose the maximum sentence for burglary without further inquiry? So let's look at what Newton hearings are. Sometimes the defendant may plead guilty to the charge they face, but dispute the specific factual version of events put forward by the CPS. If the dispute concerning the correct version of events may have a bearing on the type of sentence the court imposes, the court must either accept the defence version of events or allow both the CPS and the defendant to call evidence so the court can determine the true factual circumstances of defence on which the defendant's sentence will be based. And this whole process is called a Newton hearing, from the case of R versus Newton in 1983. When does a Newton hearing therefore become necessary? A Newton hearing is a legal procedure that takes place when a defendant pleads guilty to a charge but disputes the prosecution of events. The hearing becomes necessary when the disputed facts could significantly impact the sentence that will be imposed. In such a situation, the court must either accept the defendant's account or hold a Newton hearing to determine the true factual circumstances of the offence before sentencing can proceed. During a Newton hearing, both the prosecution and the defence present evidence to help the court determine the accurate version of events. This ensures that the sentence is based on a fair assessment of what actually occurred. In reality, therefore, in my cases I've had, witnesses were called to give evidence at the Newton hearing. So an example of a Newton hearing is Tony broke into a dwelling by smashing a window, ransacked several rooms in the property, soiled the carpets and took several items of high value. However, the defence version is different. Tony's got into the property through an open window, causing no damage to the window, denies ransacking the property or soiling the carpet, and says that he removed only a small transistor radio. The court's decision, the difference between the prosecution and defence version of events is significant and is likely to affect the type of sentence the court will impose. The court must therefore either hold a Newton hearing or alternatively accept Tony's account as being correct version of events. The significance of disputed facts. So it's basically where there's a different version lead to a different sentence. A court must establish the true circumstances. The prosecution and defence present conflicting accounts. When a defendant pleads guilty but disputes the prosecution version of events, the court must determine which account to accept. This is particularly important when the disputed facts could significantly affect the severity of the sentence imposed. Then you got this issue of basis of plea. So what is a basis of plea? It's a document that's created. Defence prepares a document setting out a defendant's factual version of events. So they normally handwrite, Tony, plead guilty to burglary on the basis of the following facts, and then sets out what those facts are. The prosecution would then review that basis of plea. CPS considers whether to accept the defence version. There's also a judicial assessment determines whether to accept the basis of plea. The outcome, sentencing, proceeds on agreed facts, or a Newton hearing is scheduled. What is the basis? What is the purpose of a basis of plea? The purpose of the basis of plea from the defence's perspective is to remove various aggravating features of the case, which would lead to a high sentence and which the defendant does not accept are an accurate reflection of what actually happened. Avoids a Newton hearing. One way the prosecution defence may try to avoid having a Newton hearing is to agree a version of events upon which the defendant will be sentenced, and sometimes there's negotiations between the defence and prosecution prior to the case being heard in the court. A basis of plea is a document that sets out the defence's factual version of events to the offence which the defendant accepts they are guilty of. What happens in the event of an acceptance of a basis of plea? Well, if a defence prepares and submits a basis of plea document, the prosecution evaluates the defence version of events, they accept a sentencing proceeds on the agreed basis. The judge also has to consider whether the basis is reasonable. If the basis is accepted by prosecution and the sentencing judge, the sentence will proceed on the version put forward by the defence. What happens with the rejection of a basis of plea? Well, defence submits the basis of plea, setting out the defence version of events. The prosecution rejects that basis, considers defence version too lenient. Judge evaluates the significance, determines if the difference between the defence and the prosecution warrants a hearing. The Newton hearing is scheduled to determine the factual basis for sentence. If the basis of plea is rejected by the prosecution and the judge thinks that the version of events put forward by the prosecution is sufficiently more serious than the version put forward by the defence so as to justify a high sentence, then this will be a Newton hearing to determine the factual basis upon which the defendant will be sentenced. What's the role of the judge? Well, basically, the judge is the final arbiter. The sentencing judge is the final arbiter on which whether or not the basis of plea is accepted. So even if the prosecution and the defence agree, it's still up to the judge. The judge is entitled to reject a base plea even if it's accepted by the prosecution. And then there's this absurdity test. The judge can reject a base of plea which they consider to be absurd. If the basis of plea is patently absurd, sentencing will take place on the prosecution version without a Newton hearing. So, rejecting an absurd basis of plea. You've got a couple of points there. Defence submits a basis of plea. Judge reviews the basis. Judge deems it absurd. Sentencing is on the prosecution facts. It is also worth bearing in mind that the sentencing judge is entitled to reject a basis of plea, which they consider to be absurd. If the judge takes the view that the basis put forward by the defence is patently absurd, sentencing will take place on the prosecution version of events without a Newton hearing taking place. And just to emphasize this point. What does it mean for the judge to be the final arbiter? The sentencing judge is the final arbiter on whether or not the basis of plea is accepted, and is entitled to reject a basis of plea even if accepted by the prosecution. The judge must weigh the prosecution defence version to determine if the differences are significant enough to warrant a Newton hearing. The judge decides whether to proceed with sentencing on an agreed basis or to hold a Newton hearing to establish the facts. Let's go back to those test your knowledge questions, the true and false questions. Feel free to pause the video and check your answers. And then again, this test your knowledge question about the burglary offence. So you can see what's happening here now about which option is the correct option, and please feel free to pause the video and read the question again and check the options and understand why the correct answer is option 3. Remember, watch all the videos in the SQE criminal practice series. Understand the functioning legal knowledge being examined by reading the SRA website. Revise from a really good SQE book. Attend and participate in classes if you attend classes. Prepare Q&A flashcards if they work for you. Practice as many of those SBAQ questions as possible. Subscribe to the channel, Community Legal Education. Hope you found this class useful. See you in the next class. Thank you for watching all the videos on sentencing, and thank you very much.